On one side, Broly, a Saiyan whose power explodes mid-fight, breaking past his limits again and again with no clear ceiling. On the other, Jiren, a warrior whose strength is so refined, so absolute that even the gods took notice. This isn't just power versus power, it's evolution versus perfection. Today, we're breaking down Broly versus Jiren and whether unstoppable growth can overcome a fighter who's already reached the pinnacle of his strength. Let's get into it. Jiren was built up for the very beginning of the Tournament of Power as something fundamentally different from any opponent Goku had ever faced. Even before the tournament officially started, during the Zen exhibition, there were already hints that Universe 11 was hiding a monster. Goku initially assumes Toppo is their strongest fighter, but that assumption gets immediately shut down when it's revealed that Jiren surpasses him entirely. That statement alone is big, but then Whis takes it even further, confirming that Jiren isn't just stronger than Toppo, he's even stronger than his own god of destruction, Belmont. At the time, that kind of scaling sounded pretty insane. Goku himself wasn't even close to Beerus by betrayal, so introducing a mortal above a god of destruction instantly raised the stakes to a completely new level. And the series backs that hype up the moment Jiren finally moves. When Goku confronts him, Jiren doesn't even attack. His presence alone is overwhelming. The pressure from his ki creates a gust strong enough to nearly bring base Goku to his knees, something we almost never see happen in the series, except for when Beerus showed up early on in the series and was able to make Vegeta bend under pressure, due to what seemed to be his aura alone, showcasing already Jiren has god of destruction-like qualities. That same aura is powerful enough to shake the Null Realm and even catches Beerus off guard. Right away, it establishes that Jiren isn't just strong, he's operating on a level that distorts the environment around him. Goku tries climbing through forms, Super Saiyan then Super Saiyan 2, but it makes virtually no difference. Jiren barely reacts. It's only when Goku reaches Super Saiyan God that Jiren even begins to block, which already says a lot about the gap. And keep in mind that Super Saiyan God Goku back in Battle of Gods was already clashing with Beerus in a way that threatened the macrocosm itself. By the Tournament of Power, Goku has grown massively beyond that point, even in his base, yet Jiren is still casually dealing with him. Then Goku steps into Super Saiyan Blue, and he's finally able to physically move Jiren, but even then it's very short-lived. Jiren immediately responds and overwhelms him. Even techniques like Blue Kaioken times 20, which had previously pushed Goku to his absolute limits, don't phase Jiren in the way you'd expect. Jiren doesn't even need to go all out, he just increases his power little by little, showing that he's operating with massive reserves still untapped. The Spirit Bomb moment is where things really highlight the difference. Goku throws everything he has into it, stacking Blue Kaioken on top, and Jiren still treats it like a minor inconvenience, pushing it back with one hand, then two, and eventually just overpowering it entirely. The energy he releases in that moment shocks Shin, who outright says it feels unlike anything they've ever encountered before, and that's suppressed Jiren. And that's what makes his betrayal so insane. He's already outperforming threats like Zamasu or Vegito Blue levels of power without even showing his full strength. Whis' earlier statement about him surpassing a god of destruction starts to feel less like hype and more like a direct explanation. Then comes on to the turning point, Goku unlocking Ultra Instinct Omen. For the first time, Jiren is actually pushed back. Goku is able to fight on even footing, landing hits, and momentarily control the pace of the battle. It's a massive shift compared to anything before, but it's still not enough. The form burns out, and the second it does, Jiren regains control and ends the exchange. What's also important is that Goku doesn't stay stagnant. As the tournament progresses, he continues to grow. By the time they fight again later, his Super Saiyan Blue alone performs noticeably better than it did in their first encounter. He's adapting mid-tournament, closing the gap step by step. Even so, when Jiren starts taking things more seriously, the difference becomes clear again. Jiren was never just another strong opponent, he was written as a wall that required Goku to evolve beyond his current limits entirely. Not just with stronger forms, but a completely different state of being. And that's why Ultra Instinct wasn't just a power-up, but a necessity. Once Jiren finally gets serious and begins tapping into more of his strength, the shift is immediate and brutal. Up until that point, he had been holding back to an absurd degree, but the moment he raises his output, he knocks Goku straight out of his powered forms back to base. Goku even admits that he hadn't been hit with a level of power before quite like this one, which is a huge statement considering everything he's endured up to this point in the story. But instead of discouraging him, it does the opposite. Goku responds by pushing himself to Super Saiyan Blue Kaioken times 20, while Vegeta breaks his own limits and unlocks Super Saiyan Blue Evolve. The anime staff have supported the idea that Vegeta's evolved state is comparable to Blue Kaioken times 20, effectively putting both Saiyans at a similar limit-breaking tier. And that's exactly how the narrative treats it. The narrator even highlights that both have entered new realms of power entirely. What's interesting here is this limit-breaking state is being emphasized after Ultra Instinct Omen had already been introduced, which implies something important. Goku's raw power at this stage, stacked with Kaioken, has already grown beyond what he's previously displayed with earlier versions of Ultra Instinct Omen. In other words, Goku isn't just relying on a new form, he's actively surpassing his own prior ceilings mid-tournament. And even with that, Jiren still stands above them. When Toppo is defeated and Jiren finally acknowledges the Saiyan's resolve, he begins to reveal more of his true power. By episode 127, this becomes a turning point. Prior to this, there were already statements suggesting Jiren rivaled or even surpassed the gods of destruction, and that was while suppressed. Now he's actually starting to fight seriously. Even so, Goku, Vegeta, and Android Android 17 manage to push him back through teamwork. For brief moments, they can even stagger him, but it doesn't last long. Jiren quickly adapts and overwhelms all three at once, completely dismantling their coordination. It takes Android 17's sacrifice and Vegeta giving up the remainder of his energy just to keep Goku in the fight. And even then, it's still not enough, until Goku taps back into Ultra Instinct Omen for the third time. This version of Omen is noticeably stronger, and Goku is able to land clean hits and genuinely stagger Jiren, something that was nearly impossible before. But what really elevates Jiren here isn't just his power, but his battle IQ. Ultra Instinct is supposed to be a state with no openings, reacting automatically to any attack, yet Jiren finds ways to counter it. As Toppo explains, Jiren had been studying Goku the entire time, watching his movements, analyzing his habits, and adapting accordingly. That's why techniques that worked before, like Goku sliding Kamehameha, suddenly fail. Still, Goku continues to evolve. After Vegeta's final words pushing forward, Goku fully synchronizes with Ultra Instinct Omen, reaching a point where he can fight with his eyes closed and strike with pinpoint precision. At this stage, Omen Goku is essentially matching Jiren at full power. Then comes the breakthrough, which is mastered Ultra Instinct. With this form, Goku completely flips the fight. He's untouchable, effortlessly dodging and countering everything Jiren throws at him. For the first time, Jiren is on the back foot and unable to react or keep up. It's a complete reversal. But Jiren isn't done. Triggered by his past and pushed into a corner, he unlocks even more of his latent power, often referred to as his limit breaker state. And in a shocking turn, he begins to fight back against mastered Ultra Instinct Goku, landing hits and even overpowering him briefly. Considering how much Goku had grown throughout the tournament, jumping massively in power in under 48 minutes is a kind of leap that is insane. At that point, they're essentially on equal footing again. However, Jiren loses composure. In a desperate move, he targets Goku's friends, which backfires completely. Goku, enraged, deflects the attack and surges even further, overpowering Jiren decisively. It becomes clear in that moment that Goku at his peak is the superior fighter, and the only reason Jiren isn't finished right there is because Goku's body gives out. Ultra Instinct collapses under its own strain, forcing Goku to rely on teamwork to finally eliminate Jiren from the tournament. So by the end of Dragon Ball Super, Jiren stands as one of the most powerful mortals ever introduced, pushing into absurd cosmic levels of power and forcing Goku to evolve beyond anything he had previously achieved. But ultimately, it's Goku who claims that top spot, if only for a brief moment, as the strongest fighter in the multiverse at the time. Broly is a really unique case when it comes to scaling, because unlike most top tier fighters in Dragon Ball Super, his entire reputation is built off a single appearance, yet one appearance is packed with some of the most extreme growth that we've ever seen. From the very start, Broly is framed as an anomaly. As a child, his latent power had already surpassed that of Vegeta, and not just any version of Vegeta either, but the same prodigy who was said to have broken all Saiyan power records at birth, which immediately sets the tone that Broly isn't just strong, he's unnaturally strong, even by Saiyan standards. And this is exactly why King Vegeta saw him as a threat and exiled him to planet Vampa, a world so hostile it barely supports life. No water, constant danger, and nothing resembling a normal ecosystem. And yet, Broly survives. Not only that, he adapts. By tapping into the raw instincts of the Great Ape without even transforming, he learns to defend himself against Vampa's predators, essentially turning a death sentence into a training ground. Over time, under the guidance of Paragus, Broly continues to grow, but there's a catch. His environment lacks real competition, so while his raw power keeps increasing, his skill and experience are stagnant. He doesn't have real battles or opponents or anything pushing him to evolve strategically. His power is there, but unrefined. That changes though the moment he's brought back into civilization by Frieza. What's crucial here is that Broly's fight against Vegeta isn't just another battle, but his real fight against a top tier opponent, and the lack of experience shows immediately. His movements are sloppy, his attacks are wild, and he doesn't even fully understand his own strength. But then something amazing happens. He starts learning mid-fight. Every exchange, punch, and dodge he adapts to. You can literally see him processing Vegeta's movements in real time, and this is where Broly's Saiyan biology kicks into overdrive. Saiyans grow stronger through the battle, but Broly takes that concept and pushes it to an extreme. He's not just getting stronger, but he's evolving. At first, Vegeta can handle him in base. Then Broly adjusts, forcing Vegeta to go Super Saiyan. Then he adapts again. And keep in mind, this is all happening while Broly is still in his base state. And that's what makes this so insane. Eventually, Broly begins tapping into his Ikari form, which is essentially him channeling the power of a Great Ape without physically transforming. Normally, the Great Ape form gives a massive boost, traditionally around 10 times, but comes with huge drawbacks, loss of control and massive size, making you an easy target. Ikari, however, removes those weaknesses. Broly keeps the raw power but retains mobility and combat capability. It's like weaponizing the Great Ape form into something practical. His aura shifts, his body bulks up slightly, and his power skyrockets. At that point, even Super Saiyan Vegeta isn't enough. He's forced to jump to Super Saiyan God just to maintain control of the fight. And even then, it doesn't last long. Initially, God Vegeta has the upper hand, which allows him to dominate Broly for a brief window. But because this is Broly, the gap doesn't stay for long and he adapts again, faster, more aggressively, and starts overwhelming even that level of power. And that's when Goku steps in, and the dynamic shifts even further, because now Broly isn't just keeping up, but he's taking over the fight entirely. What started as a clumsy, inexperienced fighter has now turned into a rapidly evolving powerhouse who can pressure god-tier opponents. And the scariest part is that there's no clear ceiling. Every time he hits a wall, he simply breaks through it. That's really the defining trait of Broly. Not just his power, but the rate at which he grows. In a single fight, his first real one goes from struggling against base Vegeta to overwhelming Super Saiyan God level fighters. And that's before he even reaches his full power. Once Broly fully taps into his Ikari state, the fight stops looking like a contest and starts looking like a runaway train. In this form, he's absolutely overwhelming Goku across multiple levels. Base Goku gets ran through. Super Saiyan Goku doesn't change anything, and even Super Saiyan God Goku, a form tied to God tier power, can't contain him. One of the clearest indicators of Broly's absurd scaling here is when he breaks through the God Bind, a technique specifically designed to immobilize and restrain opponents. At that point, Goku is forced into Super Saiyan Blue, and what's important is that it doesn't happen. He doesn't dominate Broly, he doesn't even gain a clear upper hand. Instead, the fight stabilizes. Goku can now fight evenly and nothing more. He's backed up by external material like a guidebook, which outright frames Goku and Broly as equals in that moment. So already, Broly has climbed from struggling against base Vegeta to matching Blue Goku, all within a single fight. Then, everything escalates. Frieza, realizing Broly's growth isn't fast enough for his liking, forces the issue into the most brutal way possible. He kills Paragus. The emotional trigger is his breaking point. Broly doesn't just get stronger, but he loses control completely and ascends into becoming a Super Saiyan. And this is where things get ridiculous. A standard Super Saiyan boost is already massive, but Broly's version stacked on top of everything he has already built mid-fight. The result is even Super Saiyan Blue Goku and Vegeta together aren't enough. Not only are they losing, but they're being completely outclassed. Broly at this juncture wasn't just stronger, but removes any realistic win condition through conventional fighting. And they don't even try to outmuscle him at this point, they simply retreat, which pretty much says everything. Even Golden Frieza, who had previously rivaled or surpassed blue tier level fighters depending on the arc, can't put Broly down. He lasts longer than expected, but ultimately he's just buying time against something he can't defeat. And that's what forces Goku and Vegeta into their last option, which is fusion. After a couple of failed attempts, they finally succeed and become Gogeta, canonically for the first time. And immediately the dynamic shifts again. In base, Gogeta is already performing far better than anyone else had, but even then, Broly is still adapting. And that's the key problem. As long as the fight continues, Broly continues to climb. Gogeta recognizes this and doesn't play around and escalates quickly by going Super Saiyan, then jumping straight to Blue once he's not able to end things decisively. Once he does, the gap becomes pretty overwhelming. Broly, who had just been overpowering two blue tier Saiyans at once, suddenly can't land a single hit. Gogeta Blue is operating on a completely different level with clean dodges, effortless counters, and total control. That same adaptability that Broly carried through the fight just can't keep up anymore at this juncture because the gap is too wide. The fight ends with Gogeta preparing to finish him off with a Kamehameha, only for Broly to be saved at the last second and sent back to planet Vampa. And what really seals Broly's betrayal comes after the battle. When Goku visits him, he doesn't treat Broly like just another enemy, he recognizes him as something different. He acknowledges outright that Broly might be on another level and even suggesting that he may surpass Beerus. Now, when you start looking at post-training Broly, the conversation naturally shifts away from just raw feats and into how power is actually portrayed in the highest levels of Dragon Ball Super. At this stage, transformations like Ultra Instinct or fusion forms don't feel like simple multipliers anymore. They come across more like fusion-esque jumps in power, whereas the increase is so massive that it changes the entire dynamic of a fight rather than just giving someone a numerical edge. A big part of this debate comes down to how much you weigh or give into statements, especially ones tied to promotional material. Broly being suggested as possibly surpassing Beerus sounds impressive on paper, but that kind of statement isn't exclusive just to him. Jiren was framed in a very similar, if not stronger way. Goku speculates that Broly may have surpassed Beerus, but that's clearly based on being told Jiren exceeds his own god of destruction. So rather than being a definitive claim, it's more of a comparison based on limited perspective. Because of that, it's very possible that when Goku makes a similar comment about Broly, he's really comparing him to Jiren instead of directly to Beerus. When you break down Jiren's betrayal, it's actually much more layered than Broly's. Jiren is stated to already surpass a god of destruction like Belmont in his normal state. Then when he goes even further by unlocking additional levels of power, his hidden power, and eventually limit breaking state, pushing him far beyond that initial threshold, meaning he doesn't just sit above the gods of destruction, he climbs multiple tiers beyond them. That kind of structured escalation gives Jiren a very clear and consistent scaling path. Broly, on the other hand, is defined more by rapid growth rather than layered scaling. His power skyrockets through a single fight, adapting to stronger and stronger opponents in real time. While that growth is extremely impressive, it's also less structured. The key difference shows up when you compare how each character handles top tier opposition. When Gogeta fights Broly, especially after going Super Saiyan Blue, the fight quickly becomes one-sided. Broly can't land hits, can't adapt fast enough, and is completely overwhelmed. In contrast, when Goku reaches Master Ultra Instinct against Jiren, he initially dominates him in a similar fashion. However, Jiren doesn't stay overwhelmed. He pushes past that gap and unlocks even more power and then re-enters the fight at a level where he can compete again. That ability to adapt even after being outclassed is something Broly doesn't demonstrate once Gogeta reaches his his highest level. The fight with Jiren becomes a back and forth escalation, whereas Broly's fight ultimately ends once the gap becomes too large. Even the greatest enemy argument for Broly starts to fall apart under scrutiny. Jiren isn't really portrayed as a traditional enemy, but more as a rival or a tournament opponent, and many of the statements that label characters as enemies are often translation choices rather than strict indicators of power. So using that as a definitive scaling point becomes unreliable. When everything is put together, Jiren ends up having a more complete and layered portrayal. He has clear statements placing him above a god of destruction, multiple transformations that push him even further, and the ability to contend with and adapt to the highest level of power ever shown in the series. Broly, while incredibly powerful and arguably having greater raw potential, is portrayed as an explosive anomaly whose growth is unmatched but ultimately capped once faced with an overwhelming gap. Because of that, it becomes much harder to definitively argue that Broly is stronger, and a strong case can be made that Jiren's overall portrayal just puts him ahead. When you shift the discussion over to the manga side of Dragon Ball Super, the case for Jiren arguably becomes even stronger, especially when you factor in how he continues to be referenced even in later arcs. There's this lingering idea, even post-Cell Max, that Jiren represents a kind of benchmark, a near-perfected mortal who has essentially reached a god of destruction-like tier through pure discipline and efficiency. Characters are still framed around the question of how to reach that level, which says a lot about how enduring his portrayal is. What really stands out in the manga is how Jiren performs against Goku even when Goku is using Ultra Instinct. Unlike the anime where Mastered Ultra Instinct clearly overwhelms him for a time, the manga presents a much tighter dynamic. Goku doesn't actually do significant damage to Jiren in a conventional sense. There are moments like when Goku lands a clean kick during Jiren's powered up state where Jiren more or less tanks the hit, and whenever white-haired Goku tries to engage him directly head-on in the manga, he loses those exchanges. That's a huge detail because it reframes the fight. Goku isn't winning through raw power, but he's surviving and competing through raw hacks of Ultra Instinct. Ultra Instinct in the manga leans heavily into its core concept: movement without thought, predictive reactions, and efficiency. Goku in his fight against Jiren in the manga has to rely on that precognitive style of combat, constantly weaving around Jiren's attacks instead of overpowering him directly. Meanwhile, Jiren himself is portrayed as almost an optimized machine. His fighting style is extremely direct and efficient, repeating the same high-level sequences like a 3-hit combo approach, because they're the most effective. However, that predictability becomes the one opening Goku can exploit. Over time, he starts to read Jiren's patterns, not because Jiren is weak, but because they're too optimized and simple. Even with that advantage though, Goku still can't definitively win. When he tries to meet Jiren with raw force, he gets ultimately shut down, and it still takes teamwork to bring Jiren down once and for all, reinforcing the idea that he wasn't truly surpassed in a clean one-on-one sense. Another important layer here is how power progression is handled after the Tournament of Power. The manga doesn't really present Ultra Instinct as something that keeps scaling infinitely upward towards massive jumps with each arc. Instead, it's treated more like a refined state, something to master and optimize rather than endlessly stack. So when later threats like Cell Max or even Black Frieza enter the picture, the comparisons don't necessarily invalidate Jiren's standing. In fact, there's still ambiguity around where exactly characters like Frieza fall relative to the God of Destruction fighters, whereas Jiren was explicitly placed in that conversation much earlier. It's actually stated in V-Jump that Black Frieza is not yet on the level of a God of Destruction, whereas Jiren was stated to be prior. And this is where Broly becomes harder to place after his training in the manga. Even after training, like his time learning control and technique on Beerus' planet, his portrayal doesn't definitively leapfrog Jiren's established scaling, especially in the manga's context. Broly has overwhelming raw power and insane growth, but Jiren brings something different to the table, which comes with experience, control, and efficiency at the highest level. And that matters in a fight. Even if you argue that Broly and Jiren are equal in raw strength, Jiren still has clear advantages in combat experience and key control. He fights with purpose, wastes no energy, and understands how to maximize every moment. Broly, even post-training, is still developed in that refinement. And what gets slept on a lot is Jiren's ability to adapt mid-battle as well. Unlike Broly, who couldn't adapt to a Gogeta level fighter, Jiren was able to with MUI Goku and obtained a limit-breaking form. So when you narrow the discussion specifically to base or full power Jiren in the manga versus Broly without even getting into the anime's limit breaker interpretation, as it's not present in the manga, there's a very real argument that Jiren is not only comparable but potentially superior in the manga version as well. He has more consistent statements backing his level and a more complete portrayal against top-tier opponents in a fighting style that has already proven capable of dealing with something as advanced as Ultra Instinct without even having it himself.